Hey guys, and welcome to the Animal Training Academy podcast show. I'm your host, Ryan Cartledge, and I'm really excited that you have decided to take time out of your busy schedules to come and hang out today. We're really grateful for you tuning in. And if you have been listening to the podcast for a while, we really appreciate this. Thank you so much. Hopefully you have subscribed so that you never miss an episode. But if not, or if you are new to the show, get yourself over to iTunes, Stitcher, animaltrainingacademy.com, or whatever it is you're listening to this podcast on, and hit the subscribe button to make sure you don't miss a single episode. We are bringing you today's episode on behalf of the Animal Training Academy, or ATA membership. If you like the conversations in these podcasts, then I want to invite you to continue them with like-minded people within the ATA membership area, which you can find out more about over on the ATA website. Within the membership, you can get access to twice monthly live web classes, the back catalogue of previous web classes, plus a huge library of videos and projects to problem solve different training situations. And we're a sociable bunch with an exclusive private Facebook group, forums area, and WhatsApp chat groups. It's like a Netflix social media platform for animal behaviour nerds. We will get started on today's episode where we will be talking to one Annette Pedersen. Annette started her 4-year education as a zookeeper in 1988. And in 1989, she was hired as a trainee at Copenhagen Zoo, where she completed the practical part of her education. During this time, Annette got the opportunity to work with all kinds of species in the zoo. When Annette finished her education in 1992, she then got a position at the marine mammal section working with harbour seals and Californian sea lions, and additionally alongside animals like penguins, Malayan tapirs, and barbaroussa, to name a few. From 1993 to 2008, Annette attended all seminars, courses, and conferences regarding training that she could possibly find and/or get financial support for, including a field trip in 1998 to the US, visiting Brookfield Zoo, Shed Aquarium, and Sea World Orlando. That trip changed Annette's life. In 2008, Annette moved to the elephant section, working with elephants that had just moved from free contact into protective contact. At the same time, she got the position as husbandry training coordinator. Since 2008, Annette's job has been to develop/expand the training skills of the keepers at Copenhagen Zoo, as well as daily problem solving and behaviour management with a variety of species and challenges. Since 2009, she has additionally helped develop the Danish Association of Zoos and Aquariums, DAZA, animal training course, and serves on the European Association of Zoos and Aquariums, EAZA, as chair for the Animal Training Working Group and a member of the Animal Welfare Working Group. Annette is also an instructor for the EAZA animal training courses under the EAZA Academy. Further commitments include serving on the board of the Animal Behaviour Management Alliance, the ABMA, between 2014 to 2016, and today representing ABMA as an EU liaison, working towards other European ABA conference or AAVA ABMA conference in 2020. So without further ado, it's my very great pleasure to welcome one Annette Pedersen to the show today, who is patiently waiting by. Annette, how are you?
Fine, thank you. And thank you for letting me be here, Ryan.
It's an absolute honour. You have been mentioned in the podcast show before by some of our previous guests who I know you have close working relationships with over in Europe, and your name has popped up in conversations outside of the podcast as well. Always good things being said. And so I've had you on my radar for a while. Thank you for taking time to come and hang out with us. We appreciate you being here today.
Thank you. Thank you.
And also we connected about a month ago. We've been sending emails back and forth. So the gratitude extends not just for today, but for all the time and energy you've put into this so far. We appreciate that. Thank you very much.
It's okay.
Let's get started, Annette, with our first question. We're going to dive straight in. Could you please take us back to where you got started, where you first learned about positive reinforcement animal training, and share some stories from some of the first animals you ever trained using it?
Yeah, I think my first experience with positive reinforcement, even though I didn't know that I was working with positive reinforcement, was, of course, with the sea lions that have been trained. At least one of the sea lions were trained since 87, when she was born in 86. And one of the young pups was taken off the exhibit because the exhibit wasn't really built for sea lions. It was built for elephants. And that meant there was very high slopes from the land part to the water part, and they were afraid that the sea lion pups couldn't, make the big stairs that were made for elephants and not for sea lions. So she was taken off exhibit with her mother, and because of the weather, she didn't go back with her mother, stayed in another place in the zoo and, alone. And the keeper started training her, and that was actually the very first training with positive reinforcement in Copenhagen Zoo. And I was fortunate to start working with her when I started in 89. So yeah.
87 to 89, this kind of time period, I was 4 years old in 1980.
Thank you, Ryan.
Sorry, I'm just trying to take everyone back to that period. You said it was the first time positive reinforcement was used in Copenhagen Zoo. So how did that happen? How did positive reinforcement in 1987 to 1989, how did it find its way into the zoo?
Yeah, well, really, we're just trying to, engage this young sea lion with all kinds of stuff. And one of the keepers had a dog at home, and she trained that dog. She liked training a lot. A lot of us has seen, dolphinariums and, SeaWorld on television. Remember, we didn't have internet at that time, so we were pretty much alone in our world. We had to, figure out things for ourselves. So I wouldn't say we did 100% positive reinforcement. We did some negative reinforcement too, of course, but it was mainly positive reinforcement. So it was just like, tried stuff out that worked with the dog and worked with the sea lion. So yeah, that's how it happened.
And can you share some stories about some of the behaviors you trained, or is there one kind of thing that sticks out to you from that time period that taught you a big lesson?
Oh, from that time?
With that seal back in the end of the 80s?
Yeah, well, maybe not so much the seal as, just that we I don't know, really. I remember her first experience, her first behavior was to sit on a box. We had this plastic fish box that we got fish in, turned it around, and we could put her there and like a station, because we've seen that on, sea lion shows, that sea lion sits on boxes, stations. And then she learned to pick up a ring, a small rubber ring that we threw in the pool, and she came back with that. So kind of like just boarding, like, you would do with a dog, throw a stick, and she brought it back and, played with her. And
so if this new way of training slowly filtering its way into Copenhagen Zoo was seen by the rest of the zoo, how was that taken into the zoo culture in the late 80s? Was there a culture of positive reinforcement in zoos at that time?
No, not at all. Keepers were very different at that time. Being a keeper at that time was not something with, hugging animals, and it was more like, an action hero, right? Like, John Wayne, how fast can you grab an animal and how much can you move in how short time? You have to be big and strong and scary and, do a lot of dangerous stuff. That was more like, how it was to be a keeper at that time. So it was hard to be a woman at that time because we wasn't big and strong. And I remember when I went to my job interview, to get the job as a trainee, I was not, a big woman or big girl. So I put on 3 sweaters and a raincoat, to look bigger. And it was really hot and I was sweaty. And but I made it through the interview, and I think because nobody else applied for that job, I got it. And so I was very much into training. I've always been fascinated by marine mammals, like a lot of other people. So every time when we went abroad to Spain, I always begged my parents, can we go and see, the marine lands? Can we go and see the dolphins or the sea lions? So I was really attracted to that part of the zoo. But all the other keepers didn't like it. They thought that it was circus. We got bullied a lot for doing it. People shouted at us when we came with the buckets, with the fish. Oh, you're going to do the show. Remember your show costume, So it was tough. It was mentally tough to keep on with the training. And we did have people in the section that had to give up because they couldn't take the mental pressure that it was. But at the same time, we had a very strong team because we all wanted to do it. So we fought for it. And we just kept holding on to it because we kind of felt it was the right thing. That was what we wanted to do. You can see everybody that works with positive reinforcement training with animals today can see what happens with the relationship, when the relationship you get with that animal, you just know it's right. So we kept doing it. The zoo was managed by an old keeper. He was the manager for the whole keepers section. He used to be an old keeper, which meant that a lot of the old keepers was his older colleague, his previous colleagues. So he kind of leaned on them and, made decisions with them, and they didn't like us. So he wasn't too happy about it either, but really didn't say anything. So the sea lion section became kind of, troublemaker section because we stood out and did weird stuff with the animals. So we pretty much kept to ourselves. But of course, if we didn't have had any support in the zoo, we probably wouldn't have made it. Already at that time, we did have a zoologist working there. His name is Bengt Holst. He still works at the zoo, as a lot of people have heard of him. Today, he's a scientific director of the zoo, and he always supported enrichment. And we were hosting the second environmental enrichment conference for shape of enrichment. And he also liked training a lot. He liked, this work with the animals. So he supported it the best he could from his position. And then also the head of education department was also happy about it because he could, do speaks when we trained the sea lions to go get, balls and rings and, do different things, behaviors. He could speak to it. And it was also always with the focus of natural behaviors. When they balanced the ball, they told people how good sea lions was at, balancing things and, but they were natural equipped for, being fast moving with their necks and jumping out of the pool, and how strong they were, and they could walk on their front flippers and things like that. So I think if you want the whole story right, in 94 we got a new structure in the zoo. The zoo was divided in 3 parts, and each part got their boss. And we were lucky we got a manager, a head of a department that was very much into training. And she tried to promote training all over the zoo. And she done some training with her dog. And she saw training. She had known us from the sea lion section for some years because she's been in the education department. And she liked what she saw, and she wanted more places to do that. So she tried to promote training with bears, with tigers, with anteaters, with horses, with everything possible, because she also liked it a lot. And in '97, she got to know a woman called Jackie Shiano. Jackie was from the U.S. She had been working with sea lions for 11 years, sea lions and dolphins in New England Aquarium. And we were so lucky to have her with us for around 6 months, where she told us about this training. She tried, the clicker game with us. And she said we had to be members of IMATA, the International Marine Animal Trainers Association. We didn't know what that was. And she was the one that persuaded the zoo to send us to this field trip to SeaWorld and to Brookfield and Shed Aquarium. So we got 2 weeks over there, and yeah, that changed my life because, wow, what you can train these animals for, I was so amazed. Yeah, absolutely.
It's such a fun journey I find interviews hard enough, let alone wearing 3 sweaters and a jacket. I don't think I would have been able to be very coherent if I was to do that. And I guess now there'd be so many more people going for that job. So was it that the image, the perception of zookeeper has changed as well? And back then it seems that it wasn't a job people were interested in doing, but now it's a very sought after position, would you say? Or
yeah, I mean the job as a keeper changed a lot, because in the early days there wasn't any education or anything. It was just people from farms or people that knew somebody that knew somebody. A lot of the keepers have worked in there for 40, 50 years. And when they had kids or children, they started to work at the zoo when they were about 8 years. They came with their dad to work. And when they finished school, they just got a job at the zoo because, well, they were there anyway. So kind of just followed through. So that's what the keepers were like. I have to say that I have a lot of respect for the old keepers. They knew a lot about animals, and I have learned a lot from them. So even though we didn't agree totally on, how to train animals and if training was useful or not. And it wasn't just, trying to avoid work, because that's how some felt, that, oh, you're not working now, you're just playing with the animals. Stop that and, go do some proper work. A lot of them, changed their minds over the time because they didn't know anything like we didn't know anything. So I have a lot of respect for them anyway. So absolutely, some of them are still my very good friends, I have to say.
So it started off with the seal. What was the seal's name? So I don't have to call it the seal.
The seal was a sea lion.
Sea lion.
Her name was Besse.
Besse? We'll just leave it there.
You can learn some Danish. Her name was Besse, and actually she died last year. She was 29 years old. No, that's an old sea lion. So
yeah. I'm sorry to hear that. Sorry for that loss. Sounds like she lived an amazing life, though. And those early days back in the late 80s when you were working with her, it started with your gut feeling. You trusted your own instincts about what you knew was right. Is that an accurate way of describing kind of how you were feeling at that time? Because you were going against everyone, weren't you? Pretty much.
Yes. It was a gut feeling. I mean, when you are with the animals, a lot of people knows that today when they work with positive reinforcement, they work with animals, they know that they have some kind of communication, some kind of connection. And you can just, I know it can sound wrong, but you can just see that the animals is having fun and they look forward to you coming and do these things with them. So I was in no doubt that the animals thought it was fun. Yeah.
Well, that's really great. And thank you on behalf of all the animals for having that gut feeling and not being influenced. And I appreciate that. It must have been very challenging. You mentioned that some of your coworkers actually ended up leaving because of those pressures. So yeah,
they did.
It sounds like a very challenging environment to be in. Bring us up to speed now, because you said this was 20, 30 years ago, and you've been at Copenhagen Zoo for, is it 30 years this year, is it?
Next year, actually.
Next year, 30 years next year. So let's build on everything you've shared with us thus far, and maybe tell the people listening to this show, what are some other big changes that you've seen over that 30-year period? And also curious to explore with your trip back in 1998 and with your ongoing trips to the US. I know you were just there recently for ABMA, to explore the differences that existed in these different parts of the world, in Europe versus the US versus everywhere else. Can you build on everything so far and tell us some more big changes that have happened over that 30-year period and those differences that you've noticed?
Oh, if we should talk about other things than training, I could say nutrition. Like I said, the keepers that worked there for their whole life. They started young and they retired from the zoo. Today, people are there for 2 years and then they move on. They want to see something. They want to try something else. So it's kind of, people come in with a lot of experience to share, and they leave to get more experience, and sometimes they come back. So, things develop much faster today than it did at that time. It was more like it developed inside the zoo. Today, it's more like the whole world that has an impact on how you work with animals in the zoo. So.
And do you think the new people coming in 2018 are coming in highly skilled with more ideas about positive reinforcement training, or are they still coming to the zoo green and learning on the job?
No, I think a lot of them knows a lot about training. They may not have so much personal experience, but they've seen it, they heard it, and most of all, they want to do it. Mm-hmm. And that's, of course, a big difference from 25 years back. Today they come in wanting to do it so much that they can't wait. They want to, when can I start training something? So it's kind of totally different approach than it was at that time.
And after having been in the zoo for 30 years, are the keepers coming in with brand new ideas that are completely new to you? Are they finding themselves in your position in the 80s based on all of the information that's constantly being thrown at them on Facebook and this new way of learning?
Of course, I think it's fantastic. I mean, I learn new stuff every single day. I mean, and as you say, from Facebook and podcasts like these, seminars, workshops, everybody share their things when they come back. So, of course, we learn a lot, everybody. And I mean, I think that the day I stop learning, I should stop doing the job, because we develop constantly, and we have to be able to take new stuff in and be prepared to change what we did before and try new stuff. We don't know it all yet. So, and I have to say, when you have young trainers that have trained animals for some of them have trained animals for about half a year or a year or something. They think they know everything, and they have learned what there is to learn, and now they know how to train animals. And then more years passes, and maybe they train animals for the next 5 years. The more they train animals, the more they realize how less they know. And the world just keeps getting bigger and bigger and bigger, and you just feel smaller and smaller and smaller. And that's kind of fantastic, isn't it? Because you can keep learning all the time. It's a never-ending story, and I like that.
And it's great that you call that fantastic. And I think that it's a recurring theme in the podcast show with the guests we have, and within the membership of Animal Training Academy. And we call it the more you learn, the less you know. It's very inspiring to hear you call it fantastic, because it scares a lot of people. Yeah,
but it's also so super interesting. Whenever you hear new stuff, I mean, it's so interesting. Yeah.
Do you think the young keepers coming in get intimidated by the amount of information they have to learn, or do you think they don't know how little they know when they come in?
I think it can be scary. I mean, if you throw a lot of information at them from the beginning, is my experience is that they almost don't dare to start training because they're so afraid of making mistakes, and they see mistakes luring everywhere. So, no. So, but of course you make mistakes. So that's what happened. Like Ken Ramirez says, it's not a problem making mistakes. It's a problem if you don't learn from it. So of course you will make mistakes.
And so what you're describing now with your mindset about this, and you being somebody who is having the most significant influence on the training programs at Copenhagen Zoo, it's such a complete opposite. Would you say complete opposite mindset to the late 80s with regards to we embrace change, we embrace new ideas, and also...
Yeah, I think it's... Yeah.
Sorry, go on.
No, sorry. No, it's just, it is completely opposite. I mean, people come in, they want to train animals, and they kind of complain if they don't have time enough to train. And I think it's a little funny thinking about, the old days when it was completely different.
It must make you proud to have been leading that change a lot of the time, or part of, if not leading.
Yeah.
That's my word.
Yeah, just hanging in there. And I want to point very much out that I did not do this alone. We had a great team. We had a fantastic team. Yeah.
And I really just want to build on something you said there that's I'm picking up as part of the culture at Copenhagen Zoo now, and you as you did a great job of identifying then the team embrace, and that is this mentality that it's okay to make mistakes. How important is it, do you think, for new keepers coming into Copenhagen Zoo, for you, for me, for people working at home with their dogs, for people working in the vet clinic with their patients and their clients? How important is it, do you think, to embrace this idea that mistakes are okay to make?
I think it's important, but at the same time, I think that you should do whatever you can to try to avoid it. Learn the science, learn what you should do and what you shouldn't do. And if you make mistakes, it's okay. You shouldn't be afraid of training because you're afraid of making mistakes, because you will. But I don't think you have to make mistakes to be a better trainer. And
do you think the fear of making mistakes prevents, you said this, didn't you? It prevents people from actually trying.
Yeah, sometimes, yeah. If people know too much in theory with too less practical instructions, and if they don't have rehearsed practically enough and just have a lot of theory, they kind of start being afraid of trying or to start it up because they're afraid of making mistakes because they know there's so much to be aware of.
Uh-huh.
Training is so much more than just theoretically skill. It's much more than knowledge. It's also mechanical skill. I mean, you cannot drive a car just reading a book. You have to go out and do it, right? So you may read tons of books and see tons of videos, but you still can't drive a car because it's also a mechanical skill. And I think that's the same with training. So you may be very good at all the science and stuff and have a lot of knowledge, but you will still make mistakes. But, I don't think it's a problem making mistakes. You shouldn't be afraid of it, but I don't think you necessarily becomes a better trainer for making mistakes. Does that make sense, right?
If you make the same mistakes over and over, would you say you don't become a better trainer? But if you make a mistake and you learn from the mistake and then you modify what you're doing moving forward?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, you should modify it if you make mistakes. I mean, you should learn from it. I don't think you should keep making the same mistakes. That's not learning. That's something else. I don't know.
Yeah, it's an interesting conversation, and I'm glad that it went this way. And we'll leave it in. I think there's value in it, and the takeaway, I guess, is try not to make mistakes. But if you do, learn from it and move on.
Don't be afraid of it. But it's not necessary to make a lot of mistakes to become a good trainer.
And let's talk about a few of the other changes that have happened in that 30-year period that you've been there at Copenhagen Zoo. Some of the ones that we talked about before we started recording today was how us as zoo employees are sharing more of what we're doing with zoo visitors. Was that something that was behind closed doors in the late 80s, and now it's kind of being brought out more in front of the public?
Well, I don't think if we talk about training sessions that people or the management was aware of the value of training sessions and how much people wanted to see this interaction between keepers and animals. So a lot of the training, not a lot, but some of the training facilities that are built for the animals, like with the elephants in Protected Contact, is not available for the public. So we have tried all different kinds of ways to get the guests in the house to see this training. But of course we should have built the training walls and things so that the guest could see it, because it's interesting for people. And I've seen a lot of people become really overwhelmed when they come in behind the scenes and see like a tiger training, a chimp training, elephant training, and other kinds of training that you cannot see as a normal guest in the zoo. And I think I have a story here. We have some firefighters or firemen, I think it's called, who had participated in some kind of competition where they have won a one-day tour in the zoo behind the scenes. And during that tour, they went to the chimpanzee house where they saw some chimpanzee training behind the scenes. There were two guys that had won this special day at the zoo. And they watched the chimpanzee training, and they were overwhelmed with, how they saw the animals cooperating with the keepers and allowing injections and, showing teeth and standing up and sitting down and showing hands and whatever they did. And after the session, one of the firemen, he said, okay, I have to be honest with you. Before I came here today, I was actually against zoos. But now that I've seen this, I have totally changed my mind. I never knew this was going on. I never knew that the relationship between the keepers and the animals were like this. So at least we made a difference for one person. And I think a lot of people would change their opinion about zoos if they don't like zoos, if they saw this relationship that is between keepers and their animals.
And in Europe, what is I'm going to ask a question based on some information I found out recently in New Zealand, is that we have in our country 80, I'm going to use the word organisation for lack of a better word, organisations that call themselves zoos. And so we're trying to bring this stuff out and share it with our visitors in 2018. But in Europe, how many zoos do you think there are, and how many of those are in the EASA, and what does it mean to be a zoo? What's the definition of that word? And it's cool you get to see that. And do you think, well, the reason I'm asking this, do you think part of that is, and I may be completely wrong here, that people are going to these other organisations that aren't doing this stuff maybe? Does that make sense?
Yeah, well, I have no idea how many zoos there are in Europe. There's a lot. I should know how many zoos are EASA members, but I don't, I'm afraid. But I do know that there's a very big difference between the zoos, how many zoos allowing training or not. Some zoos, they really appreciate and they have to train animals, and other zoos, it's simply not allowed. So they're all in all ends of the scale.
So us doing this amazing stuff, I use the word amazing, it's part of what we do now. We don't necessarily have to see it as amazing, but their firefighters saw it as a perception-changing experience. And so have you seen that over the 30 years, the appreciation of how powerful those experiences are and can be for our zoo visitors change and shift?
Yeah, of course, because the training brings the animals closer to guests. They can even, interact with the guests. So there's no doubt that it has a great value, and also it teaches much more about animals and what animals are able to, and also how they learn, just like we learn. The animals can learn, and they can accept things that you never thought was possible. And also, I think that it goes the other way around, that people actually think, okay, if you can do that with a tiger, what can I do with my dog at home? So we get a whole new role as a zoo, actually, also servicing the pets in the houses. So people actually take something else home from the zoo that animals can learn.
Yeah, I love that. That's awesome. And another thing you mentioned that's changed over the last 30 years when we caught up about a month ago was how we are using the science more and more, would you say? Tell me if I'm wrong here. In treating all animals the same, big or small, doesn't matter if it's a tiger or a guinea pig.
Exactly. I think we try to say that all animals has a right to be treated fair, with respect. So, it doesn't matter if it's an elephant or a sea lion or a tiger or whatever it is. I've always felt strongly about that. And I went to an APMA conference in 2013 in Toronto, and I saw a presentation from this guy, Will Brunner, where he talked about education animals. And the role that they had in the zoo was actually one of the most difficult ones, because they had to be, exposed to a lot of strangers. They don't know a lot of different people in a lot of different setups. And a lot of the times these animals was not prepared for it. I mean, you would never ask the same things for a tiger like you would with a guinea pig. A guinea pig is small and it doesn't bite you. It's very rare that it do, and so you just catch it, pick it up, and let maybe 30 kids pet it for half an hour, and then you put it back in, and that's fine. And nobody really thinks so much about the welfare of the guinea pig. So if we start looking at that, it's actually, is it okay? I thought, well, it's not. And what Will he showed in that presentation was actually amazing, how we could prepare these animals for what they were used for. And I showed this presentation for our education section, the keepers at the education section, and they were so enthusiastic when they saw it that they just 20 minutes later they called me and they had a plan on how they were going to train these guinea pigs to be used for educational purposes. So that was amazing, and they did a great job since then. So all our guinea pigs are trained.
Can you talk us through what those changes were and what change you've seen at Copenhagen Zoo with regards to the education animals, and how you've travelled through that space?
Well, it was kind of difficult because, there's a lot of people involved in these animals. But there's some educational educators that has to use these animals, so they need some kind of efficiency. They have to run these hours for these classes, and they have to use these animals to be picked up and handed to all the kids. So we needed to find a way to do this efficiently. So they crate trained these guinea pigs, and in the crates there's this little sling that is folded up around the guinea pig, and you lift them up in a sling and you carry them around from kid to kid. And it sounds funny maybe, but carrying them in this way, they will never lose contact with the surface. I mean, guinea pigs was not meant to fly, so they feel kind of insecure when they're just hanging there. But if you put them in a sling or in some clothes and you move them around, they don't stress as much. And I've seen the guinea pigs, when they lift them up, they unwrap them. When they're sitting with a child, they just keep on eating whatever they have. They always got salad leaves or stuff with them, so they can eat all the time. And You can see the stress. They don't freeze like they normally would do. So that was the guinea pigs. And other kinds of animals. It could be the horses in our pet zoo. We used to have pony rides. And it took it was quite expensive because you needed to have many horses. You need to have a lot of staff to walk these horses. And you have to have many horses because they wanted to shift the horses so they could have breaks now and then. So we went from, I think, 22 horses to 5 horses. And instead of using them for pony rides, we decided to do something else where they could interact with the guests still, but in another way that you usually see horses, and also to give people a new idea of how to interact with a horse. So we started doing horse agility. Like you've seen with dogs, we did it with horses. And one of the things we do with the agility is that we have the horse going on a teeter-totter. And in the first time you hear it, you think, oh, that's funny. Well, it's exercise for the horse. You see how they use their muscle to make the teeter-totter go up and down. And then you can have, kids in one end and a horse in the other end, and the horse doing the teeter-tottering, and the kids are working with the horse on this teeter-totter. And also they can run, the agility course with the kids. So it's another way of interacting or have contact with these animals.
Yeah, sounds like a lot of fun. And I think that we've just found the title for this podcast episode, Annette, which is Guinea Pigs Were Not Meant to Fly.
No, exactly.
And can you potentially, 2 more things just before we move on to talk about choice and control and welfare. 2 more things. For people that might be in a zoo, because I know you've seen a lot of change with regards to so many different things at Copenhagen Zoo, including education animals. But for people that are listening to the show that might be in a zoo with education animals where they see the necessity for change and for helping these animals be more successful with that huge amount of variability that you suggested these animals have to be exposed to over time. But they might not have that culture yet. What advice can you give to people that might be in that position?
It's hard because if the whole if the zoo and the management is not into training, it's a really a tough thing. But I think if you want to make a change for these animals, especially what's really important is to talk with all the people that are involved in using these animals. So let the educators tell you what they need. And how much can they do to make the training possible, and also find a way to train things that doesn't take a lot of skills and it's not complicated for the educators to use. Make sure that all people involved are asked about this before you start it, I think.
Great advice. And involve everyone. Anything else before we move on? I'm just conscious of time, but I'm going to restrain myself from this massive note of questions I have in front of me. Anything else you just want to add on to that little segment about advice for people? That I think that's great. Involve everyone.
Yeah. And also let people know that it's not because you want to change things are not because you think that what they did all the time or before was wrong. I mean, just say, okay, we do a lot of things that can be better. And as soon as we know that we can change things to become better, we should do that. But that's not the same as blaming people for what they did. People can't do anything else that they know how to do. I mean, you have to tell them first.
Yeah, beautiful. And good that we got to add that on the end there, so we're not sending people on missions to upset people. One other thing, and I'm once again conscious of time, but this is for me something that resonates with my thinking, especially at the moment, and so I wanted to get your thoughts on it before we do move on to choice and control. And this is that we need more imagination. This is something you and I talked about when we caught up earlier. Can you unpack this for a little bit? What do you mean when you say we need more imagination in our training?
Yeah, I just think that being creative is a great thing. And sometimes people come and they say, "Oh, we can't do this, we can't do that," and say, "But can we find a way to do it anyway?" I mean, like I have an example. Like we were training our mouse deers. Mouse deer is the smallest deer that exists. They're just like, I don't know how much they weigh, a couple of kilos maximum, 1.5 kilos maybe. They're very, very small, and their legs are like thinner than my little finger, and they break easy if you try to catch them, and some of them die of stress when you try to catch them. So it's actually quite a serious matter if you have to get hold of these animals. And that's why our keepers are training these animals in the zoo to go on a scale and go into a crate, so we can keep an eye on them without having to grab them. And one day one of the keepers came to me and said, "Oh no, we have to catch the baby mouse deer, the smallest one we had." And I said, "Why do we have to do that?" And it had just started its training. It was going on a station. And the keeper said, "Well, we have to know what if it's the male or female, because it has to go on the surplus list, because it has to go to another zoo when it gets old enough. But we can't put it on the surplus list because we don't know how old it is. So we have to grab it." And I said, "How do you find out? I mean, yeah, well, how much do you have to grab that animal to find out if it's male or female?" And he said, "Well, we have to grab it and turn it upside down." I was like, "Oh no," because that would be a big risk, and also certainly ruin the training for some time. And then we came up with the idea of putting a GoPro camera in the station where the animal had learned to go up on. And you can actually find that video on YouTube where the keeper puts the GoPro camera in the station, goes out and just feeds this little mouse deer on the station, and we have beautiful pictures of this little female mouse deer, and it didn't even notice it. I mean, and sometimes you just, instead of just, go dark and say, "Oh no, we can't do this," try to see if there's any way that you can think of that you can, create something so you don't have to expose the animal for stress.
I love that, and we'll find that video and share it in the podcast write-up, if that's okay with you, so people can go and check it out.
Absolutely. Mm.
And you said there, if people say we can't, ask, how can we do it anyway? And do you think that is a cultural thing, a culture maybe of we can't versus a culture of how do we do it anyway? Is it an individual thing? How can we foster that kind of creativity?
Oh, I think it's a very individual thing. I think some people just, see all the bad stuff. If the glass is half full or is it half empty, I think that's very different from person to person. Somebody shuts down faster than others. Yeah.
Does it come back to being okay with making mistakes?
Oh, you really want to go there, won't you?
I'm just thinking about that. Is it
Maybe it's that's how it worked with punishment. If people have been punished too much, they hesitate and they really are not sure they want to go there. So maybe it has something to do with their life. I don't know.
and I'm thinking also that, and tell me what you think here, and maybe you can build on my understanding of how this works or appreciation of it. In talking about punishment there, if ideas are met with we can't, it potentially can, and this is moving from, in my mind, and I'm interested in your thoughts, the individual to the organizational culture. We can't might be met with people not wanting to offer ideas anymore, which kills creativity type thing. What's your thoughts on how asking the right questions can just engender creativity across teams or not?
I think you should always encourage motivation, of course, when people want to do something, even though it's maybe the wrong things, but encourage trying. I always try to say, and I always try not to use the word no. So if people ask or suggest something that is completely out of order. I just say, oh, that's perfect, just not in this connection. Maybe in some other example it would be perfect. So, or maybe, yeah, well, a blue one would be great here, but because this and that, it just doesn't work. So it would work if the situation had been some kind of different. So I always try to see if their answer or their suggestion could fit in somewhere else. Does that make sense?
Perfect. Absolutely. I the reason I'm asking these questions, I think creativity, and I think to build on what you're saying, I agree is super important. So anyway, we can help people be more creative and come up with solutions like GoPros and stations, which is genius and at the same time simple, right?
Yeah, exactly. Well, just like I came to the crocodile team the other day, and they built this feeding tongue, extended feeding tongue, and it was quite funny. I saw it lay there in the kitchen, and it looked like some kind of, I don't know, a weird thing that I was afraid the crocodile would hurt itself grabbing the fish from it. But when I saw it in action, it actually worked. So, oh, wow, I was surprised. I mean, if they had suggested that, I would have said, no, that doesn't work. The poor crocodile will hurt itself. But, it worked. So, yeah, you can be surprised.
Love it. Hey, let's move on to talking about, as mentioned earlier, choice and control. And you and I were talking about this when we caught up. And one thing that you really wanted to share in this episode is the notion that choice and control does not equal welfare. Can you unpack that statement for us, Annette, and tell us what you mean with this?
Oh, yeah. First of all, I will have to say that it's just thoughts. And I am totally for choice and control. Of course I am. Animals should have choices. They should have control, of course. But it's just like sometimes, I know it also happens to a positive reinforcement. When people just say, I'm a positive reinforcement trainer. Okay, I'm home safe. I'm a good trainer. But is that the case? I mean, yeah, you can positively reinforce an animal, but what if the animal does a behavior that you cannot reinforce? What do you do then? You ignore the behavior in best cases, or maybe you redirect, but you do something else because you cannot reinforce the behavior if that's not a behavior you want to reinforce. And so I think it's a balance, like with positive reinforcement. If you ignore or redirect more than you actually positively reinforce, are you then a real positive reinforcement trainer? And that the same with choice and control, because I've seen a lot of presentations lately where this choice and control thing has been used like, okay, I use choice and control, the animal has lots of choice and control, and that's the same as saying everything I do is good. And then I started to think, is unlimited choice and control actually a good thing? And then I started asking myself questions, and I came across something called the paradox of choice. I don't know if you heard about it. The paradox of choice is when choices are actually too much. It goes for people, of course, but sometimes, in learning processes and other things, you can equal learning for people as well as animals. So let's say you have too many choices, that it can actually make it difficult to choose at all. So if you have an example, you come into a shoe store and you want to buy a pair of shoes, and you see a pair of shoes and you think, oh, they're really cool, I want to buy those. And then you see they are in 3 different colors. You have to pick a color because you cannot afford all 3 pairs of shoes, so you have to pick a color. And that's really tough, because if I had this clothes on, these shoes may be best, and if I had this clothes, these may be. Which one can I use for most different kinds of clothes? Anyway, you have to pick, and then you take the shoes to the counter, and you say, I want to buy these, and say, wow, there was a really hard choice. There were cool colors, all 3 of them. And then this guy behind the counter say, oh, but that's not a problem. I have 2 more colors in the back here, you can see. But that's actually the worst thing he could actually say, because what you don't need right now is more choices because it was difficult enough. So I don't know if you get what I mean, but it makes it difficult to choose at all. And also, the more choices we have, if there's too much to choose from, we're actually less happy with the choice we make because there are too many things that you had to choose from. And also there's something called the opportunity cost. If you choose one thing, well, you have to let something else go. So you have to miss something to get something if you can choose between two things. So how we make those choices available for animals, we would have to think about. And then there's something about all these. I mean, if the animal always knows what to choose from, what happens to unpredictability? Because we also say that we have to be unpredictable to be motivating and to be interesting, so the animals doesn't know what's next. And I have quite a funny example about what happened to when you have too many choices. I went to this workshop with somebody teaching this workshop. It doesn't matter who it was. It was a 3-day workshop, and on the second day we went out to dinner, and this person talked about positive reinforcement training and choice and control. And we sat there at dinner table. It was in Denmark, and we handed the menu and said, "What would you like to eat?" And this person says, "Oh, I don't know. I just take whatever you take." And I said, "Why? The menu is in English. You can read it." "Yeah, well, it doesn't matter. I just take what you take." And I think it was funny because this person has been making choices for 2 days about what to tell us, what to say, what to answer, when to start the session, when to finish the session, for 2 days. And when we went out for dinner, this person just didn't want to make any more choices. And also we see the people with the most choices, like directors, people in high positions, they're the ones that get stressed most of the time because they have to make decisions all the time because they have choices. So maybe choices can be stressful. I don't know. I mean, it's just questions. I just want to say that I want to make absolutely sure I'm not against choice and control. I am not. But I think too much, maybe not too much control, but too many choices, and that you always have to choose and you always know what you have to choose from may not always be the best scenario, even for animals.
No, I love it. And I was having the same conversation, to be honest with you, with my wife last night. And she's saying, "What do you want for dinner? What swimming pool do you want to go to?" I was like, "You make those choices. I've been thinking all day. I've been making choices all day. This is up to you." And I heard in a podcast recently, and I'm going to absolutely butcher this, so don't quote me on this, but Barack Obama wore the same kind of suit and had the same thing for breakfast every day. And when he was asked why, this might be completely false, I heard it in another podcast, he said, "I've got more important decisions and choices to make than what clothes I'm going to wear and what I'm going to eat for breakfast." And I love this idea of minimizing those choices, and it can be stressful if we have too much. So I really resonate with that. Thank you for sharing. We've shared a lot of stories, so I think we're going to, and looking at the time, skip past the storytelling session of this podcast, if that's okay with you, Annette.
Yeah, it's fine.
Let's move into the final question, sadly, because it's been so much fun. But for this final part, can you take us all into the future, Annette? You've been at Copenhagen Zoo for 30 years. We've been on an amazing journey with you in this podcast episode over this 30-year period and what you've learned and the things that have changed. Can you take us on a journey now into the future, into the next 5 to 10 years? What would you really like to see continue to happen or completely change over the next wee while?
Well, maybe not completely change. What I want to see is just that the positive reinforcement training should go even further, developing more. And I hope that it will, for all zoos, of course, but this sounds more like a dream, but I hope that it will have much more influence like nutrition and cleaning and enrichment actually does today, and that also management will look at it as more like an investment in animal welfare, and not like some places they look at it as a luxury. Do we have time for this? Then it's okay. If not, then we don't do it. And also, even worse, that some places still look at it as circus. So I hope that it will be like a natural part of animal care in more zoos. And also understand that it is an investment. It takes time. Yeah, that's true in the beginning. But once it's learned, you save so much time, and you get rid of so many problems like shifting problems and fear responses and aggressive responses, and you get so much more welfare. And what we still see today is that there are problems that are really hard to solve in the zoos today, like polar bears. They stereotype a lot, and the worst thing happening is if we kind of just desensitize to it and say, yeah, well, that's what polar bears does in zoos, because it's not. I mean, we should keep on working on it and use the science behind training, behind learning, to try and solve these problems. And also, as we talked about earlier, Ryan, that understand that we have an obligation to the guests, that we can give them something to take back home and work with their pets too, with their animals at home. So we actually not only serve our own animals, but we serve, all people's own animals too. And, broaden out the knowledge about positive reinforcement training. Yeah.
Couldn't have asked for a better way to end this podcast today. Great. Love it. Absolutely agree with you. Fantastic. Great vision for the future. And thank you so much for sharing everything today, Annette. So before we do wrap up, from myself and on behalf of everyone listening, we really appreciate you hanging out with me today and taking the time to come on the show and share your thoughts and experiences. Thank you very, very much.
Thank you, Ryan.
Absolute honor. And we, of course, really appreciate all of you tuning in today as well. If you have enjoyed this episode and you were interested in carrying on the conversation about working with our animals in the most positive, funnest, choice-rich ways, then as mentioned at the start of the episode, the Animal Training Academy community is waiting for you. Head on over to www.animaltrainingacademy.com and click on the membership button in the main menu to learn more about what members are describing as the Netflix social media platform for behavior geeks. There's something there for absolutely everyone. We're looking forward to having you join the tribe. That's it for this episode, though. We're going to wrap it up there. Thanks again so much for listening, everyone, and you will hear from us again soon.